12. Creepiest Ancient Ruins Buried in the Australian desert picture, the emptiest place you can imagine. Now strip away the roads, the phone signal, the sound of another human voice. What you have left is the Australian desert. And scattered across its red silence are things that were never meant to be found again. Stone walls with no roof. Machinery rusting exactly where the last worker set it down. Graves with names the wind has almost erased. These are not the ruins of some distant foreign empire. They belong to people who came here full of hope, built something out of nothing, and then vanished so completely that the desert simply closed over them as if they had never existed at all. Some of these places were swallowed by sand. Some were poisoned by the very ground they stood on. And a few are so remote that fewer people have walked through them than have stood on the summit of Mount Everest. The strange thing, the thing that makes all of this so unsettling, is that most Australians have never heard of a single one of them. They drive past the turnoffs on the highway with no idea what lies at the end of those red dirt tracks. And here is the part that keeps people awake at night after they finally visit one. The outback does not just abandon these places. It seems to actively erase them, pulling the sand up over the walls, rusting the iron down to nothing, and softening every hard edge until the whole settlement melts back into the ground it came from. Given enough time, there will be no sign at all that anyone ever tried to live there. So the question is not simply where these places are. The real question is what happened to the people who built them, and why the land itself seems so determined to take everything back. Today we are traveling into the driest, oldest heart of the continent to uncover 12 of the creepiest ancient ruins buried in the Australian desert. Some are ghost towns frozen in the moment they died. Some are older than anything you were ever taught in school. All of them will make you look at that vast empty red map very differently by the time we are finished. Before we drive out past the last fence line, if you love stories about forgotten places and the mysteries the outback refuses to explain, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell. A single like genuinely helps these overlooked histories reach the people who would never otherwise hear them. Now, let us leave the sealed roads behind and see what the desert has been quietly hiding all this time. Number 12. Farina, South Australia. 200 kilometres south of the Mari turnoff, in a landscape so flat and dry that the horizon seems to shimmer and bend, sit the crumbling stone shells of a town that was born from pure optimism. Farina means flower in Latin, and the settlers who arrived in the 1870s genuinely believed they could grow fields of wheat in this country. They could not. The rain that the government maps had promised them simply never came. Yet for a few stubborn decades, Farina clung to life as a railway town, complete with 2 hotels, a bank, a school, a brewery, and an underground bakery dug deep into the earth to escape the killing summer heat. Today, the roofless walls stand open to a merciless sky, and the desert wind moves through empty doorways where hundreds of people once laughed and argued and slept. What makes Farina genuinely unsettling is the cemetery on its edge, crowded with the graves of children who never lived to see their second summer. The town did not die in a single dramatic disaster. It died slowly, painfully, family by family, as each one finally admitted the land had beaten them and loaded their lives onto the last train out. But the ruins are not entirely silent even now, because a small band of volunteers returns every winter to fire up that underground bakery one more time, as if refusing to let the place die completely. The smell of fresh bread drifting across a graveyard of empty stone houses is something visitors say they never quite forget. Number 11. Kanyaka Station, South Australia. In the shadow of the Flinders Ranges lie the sprawling ruins of what was once one of the largest sheep stations in the entire colony. At its peak in the 1860s, Kanyaka supported around 70 families and tens of thousands of sheep spread across the surrounding plains. Then came the drought that would define the region, and the men who chased their dying livestock across the cracking ground began to break down from exhaustion, debt, and despair. The homestead ruins today are extensive, a confusing maze of roofless stone rooms slowly returning to rubble, and the atmosphere that hangs over them is heavy in a way that photographs somehow never managed to capture. Nearby stands a lonely grave and the Death Rock, a great weathered boulder where, according to long local memory, a dying Aboriginal man once sat and waited quietly for the end to come. Visitors to Kanyaka consistently describe the same strange sensation as they move among the walls, a persistent feeling that they are not entirely alone, that something just out of sight is watching them explore. Therefore, many people who set out to spend an afternoon photographing the ruins find, without quite knowing why, that they leave far sooner than they ever planned to. Number 10. Cossack, Western Australia. On the edge of the Pilbara, where the Red Desert finally collides with the Indian Ocean, stand the beautiful and abandoned stone buildings of Cossack. This was once the busiest port in the entire northwest, the beating heart of a pearling industry that made enormous fortunes and destroyed countless lives in almost equal measure. The Grand Stone Courthouse, the Bond Store, and the Customs House still stand today in remarkable condition, which somehow makes the emptiness feel far worse than simple decay ever could. You expect ruins to be broken and collapsed. Instead, Cossack feels like a town whose entire population simply stood up, walked out one ordinary morning, and never once came back. The pearling trade here relied on divers, many of them Aboriginal and Asian, who were worked to death in dangerous waters for the profit of others, and the old cemetery is divided by race and religion in a way that quietly tells its own deeply uncomfortable story. A series of cyclones eventually drove the last of the living away for good, but the dead remained behind. And the heavy silence that hangs over Cossack today is the silence of a place that remembers, in perfect detail, exactly what was done to build it. At dusk, when the light turns the old stone gold and the tide pulls back across the mudflats, it is easy to understand why so few people are willing to stay in Cossack after dark. Number 9. Arltunga, Northern Territory, far east of Alice Springs, at the end of a rough and rattling track through the East McDonnell Ranges, lie the scattered ruins of Central Australia's very first town. Gold was discovered here in 1887, and desperate men walked hundreds of kilometres across waterless country to reach it, many of them collapsing and dying along the way before they ever laid eyes on a single nugget. Those who somehow survived the journey built a police station, a stone gale, and a battery to crush the ore, all of it constructed from rock hauled painfully out of the surrounding hills by hand. The gold, when they finally reached it, was thin and stubborn, and the suffering required to win it was immense. Arltunga is now one of the best preserved gold mining ghost towns anywhere in the country, and walking slowly through its stone shells, you can still peer down the mine shafts that were sunk into the solid rock using nothing but muscle and iron. What truly lingers here is the sheer desperation of the place, the crushing knowledge that men gave their entire lives for a reward that barely existed at all. Therefore, Arltunga stands today not as a monument to fortune, but as a monument to obsession and the terrible things it drives people to endure. Number 8. Old Andado, Northern Territory, deep in the Simpson Desert, surrounded by rolling red sand dunes stretching to the horizon in every single direction, sits one of the most profoundly isolated homesteads ever built anywhere in Australia. Old Andado is a low tin and timber house that has been left almost exactly as it stood on the day it was last lived in, right down to the tins still sitting in the pantry and the beds still made up neatly in the bedrooms. For decades, a remarkable woman named Molly Clark lived out here entirely alone after tragedy took her husband and family, stubbornly refusing to abandon the property even as the desert pressed in against the walls on every side. To step inside the house today is to step directly into a moment frozen in time, a home still patiently waiting for people who are never, ever coming back. The nearest neighbour is hours away across trackless, shifting dunes, and at night, the silence out here is reported to be so absolute that visitors can hear the sound of their own heartbeat inside their ears. It is not a ruin in the crumbling, collapsing sense at all. It is something far stranger, a complete and preserved home that the desert has quietly surrounded on all sides and is now waiting with infinite patience to slowly reclaim. Those who stay overnight speak of a place that feels not empty but occupied, as though the last owner never truly left the rooms she loved so fiercely. Number 7. Dalhousie Ruins, South Australia, on the western edge of the Simpson Desert, beside a scattered cluster of ancient thermal springs that have flowed continuously for well over 1 million years, stand the pale ruins of the old Dalhousie homestead. The springs themselves are genuinely extraordinary. Fed by rainwater, that fell in far-off Queensland and has travelled slowly underground for thousands of years to finally surface here in the absolute middle of nowhere. Around this permanent water, the settlers built a grand stone house shaded by imported date palms, utterly convinced that the reliable springs would guarantee them the success that had escaped so many others. The palms still stand there today, strange and green and wildly out of place, dropping their fruit onto the red sand around the collapsing stone walls. But the crushing isolation broke the settlement in the end, exactly as it had broken so many before it. What makes Dalhousie so quietly eerie is the stark contrast between the living, bubbling water rising up from deep inside the ancient earth and the dead, silent house standing right beside it. One is ancient and eternal. The other was a brief and failed human dream the desert has already half swallowed. Number 6. Gwalia, Western Australia. Just outside the small town of Leonora, on the parched edge of the Western Australian goldfields, sits the ghost town of Gwalia, whose famous mine was once managed by a young American engineer named Herbert Hoover, long before he went on to become President of the United States. When the mine here abruptly and unexpectedly closed in 1963, the entire population of the town packed up and left within a matter of weeks. In fact, they left so suddenly that they simply abandoned their homes with the furniture still inside, the tables still set for meals, and their personal belongings still resting on the shelves. Walking through Gwalia today feels less like exploring a ruin and more like walking through a town that suffered a sudden, silent evacuation. Corrugated iron miners' cottages stand frozen in the middle of ordinary life, chipped cups still on the tables, worn boots still by the doors, newspapers from that final year slowly yellowing on the wooden floors. The relentless desert heat has preserved it all with an almost cruel and loving patience. Therefore, Gwalia is not really a ruin in the traditional sense. It is a photograph, a single fragile moment of collapse held perfectly and eerily still for more than 60 years. Stand among the cottages long enough, and you half expect to hear a distant door swing shut in there. Number 5. Cordillo Downs, South Australia. In the far and forgotten northeast corner of the state, in some of the most genuinely remote country on the entire continent, stands an enormous stone woolshed that seems to belong to another world altogether. Built in the 1880s on a sheep station that was once the size of a small nation, the Cordillo Downs woolshed has a distinctive curved stone roof for one simple and haunting reason. There was no timber available for hundreds of kilometers in any direction to build a conventional one. The result is a vast, cathedral-like structure of stone rising defiantly out of absolutely nothing. A building where more than 80,000 sheep were once shorn in a single season. The station eventually failed, as the desert slowly defeated both the sheep and the exhausted men who tended them across the endless plains. Today, the great woolshed stands utterly alone beneath an overwhelming sky, its thick stone walls trapping the heat of the day, its cavernous interior echoing with a silence that feels almost physical enough to touch. To come upon it suddenly after many hours of empty, jolting track is genuinely disorienting. A monument built by people who are long dead and gone, standing in a place that never should have supported human life at all. Number 4. Wittenoom, Western Australia. Some ruins are unsettling because of what happened to the people who once lived there. Wittenoom is terrifying because of what is still lying in the ground. Once a thriving town of several thousand people in the Pilbara, Wittenoom was built entirely on the mining of blue asbestos, and the deadly microscopic dust was everywhere in daily life, drifting through the streets, spread across the school playgrounds, and mixed directly into the very soil the children played in. As the death toll from asbestos disease climbed steadily into the thousands over the following decades, the government took an almost unbelievable step. It made the deliberate decision to erase the entire town from existence, removing it from official maps, cutting off the power supply, and demolishing the buildings one by one. Wittenoom no longer officially exists as a place at all, yet stubborn fragments of it still remain scattered out in the desert, and the poisonous asbestos tailings still lie thickly across the surrounding landscape, invisible, weightless, and lethal. To stand near what little is left of Wittenoom is to stand in a place the authorities are actively and desperately trying to make the entire world forget forever. A handful of stubborn residents refused to leave even after the town was officially wiped off the map, living on in a place that the government insists is no longer there. Therefore, it may well be the single most genuinely dangerous ghost town anywhere on Earth. Number 3. Eucla Telegraph Station, Western Australia. Out on the vast and utterly treeless plain of the Nullarbor, close to the South Australian border, the ruins of the old Eucla Telegraph Station are being slowly and silently swallowed whole by a rolling ocean of blinding white sand. Built in 1877, Eucla was once a busy and important relay point on the Great Telegraph Line that finally connected the eastern colonies to Perth and the wider world beyond. But the settlers who lived here made one small and fatal mistake. They introduced rabbits to the area, and the rabbits bred and multiplied and destroyed the fragile vegetation that had held the enormous coastal dunes in place for millennia. With nothing left to anchor it against the wind, the sand began to move, and it has been steadily burying the station ever since that day. Today, the pale stone ruins rise up and then vanish again beneath the shifting dunes, depending entirely on the mood of the wind, sometimes fully exposed, sometimes almost completely buried from sight. It is one of the very few places in all of Australia where you can actually stand and watch the desert physically consuming a human building in slow, patient motion. The dunes have already claimed most of it. In time, they will quietly take the rest, until nothing remains but a low white swell of sand where a piece of the modern world once stood. Number 2. The Farina Fish Traps, New South Wales. Now we leave the ghost towns and the failed dreams behind us, and we reach out to touch something far, far older than any of them. In the rocky bed of the Barwon River, on the edge of the semi-arid outback, lies a vast and intricate network of stone weirs and holding pens that may well be one of the oldest surviving structures ever built by human hands anywhere on the entire planet. The Farina fish traps, known in language as Biamese Nunhu, are estimated by some researchers to be many thousands of years old, potentially far older than the Great Pyramids of Egypt, and older even than Stonehenge itself. Countless generations of Aboriginal people carefully arranged and maintained these stones to channel and catch fish, in a design so genuinely sophisticated that it still functions perfectly today. To stand above them on the riverbank is to look directly at feats of engineering that predate almost everything the rest of humanity considers to be ancient history. These are not the ruins of failure, like the ghost towns we have already seen. They are the exact and hopeful opposite, a living structure that has survived far longer than any European building on the continent, quietly and reliably enduring in the riverbed, while entire empires on the far side of the world rose up, conquered, and then crumbled into forgotten dust. Number 1. The standing stones and stone arrangements of the interior. Scattered secretly across the deep deserts and semi-arid plains of Australia are ancient Aboriginal stone arrangements, whose full purpose and meaning researchers are still working carefully to understand even today. Some of them, like the great and famous arrangement at Wurdi Uwang, appear to be deliberately aligned with the seasonal movements of the sun, marking the solstices and the equinoxes with a precision so exact that it strongly suggests deep astronomical knowledge held and passed down for many thousands of years. Others form vast circles, long lines, and complex patterns laid out across the bare ground, whose true meaning is known now only to the traditional custodians of that country, if indeed it is still known to anyone at all. Many of these arrangements sit in country so profoundly remote that they are almost never visited by outside eyes from one year to the next. What makes them the most quietly haunting entry on this entire list is not fear at all, but rather a deep and humbling sense of awe. Long before the ghost towns rose and fell, long before the telegraph line was strung across the plain, long before the very first sheep station failed and emptied, people stood here on this same ancient red ground and arranged these heavy stones with clear purpose, patience, and care. The same hungry desert that swallowed the settlers so completely has left these far older markers almost entirely untouched, as though it somehow recognizes something in them that it never once recognized in us. So there they are, 12 ruins buried in the vast silence of the Australian desert, ranging from ghost towns frozen in the exact moment of their collapse, all the way to stone arrangements older than recorded human history itself. And a strange and striking pattern begins to emerge when you finally look at them all together, side by side. The newest of these places, the ghost towns and the failed stations, are the ones the desert has destroyed most utterly and completely, precisely because they were built in stubborn defiance of the land by people who fundamentally refused to understand it. The oldest of them, the fish traps and the ancient stone arrangements, are the ones that quietly endure, precisely because they were built by people who chose to work patiently with the desert rather than wage war against it. Perhaps that, in the end, is the real and uncomfortable lesson buried out there in all that red silence. The desert does not truly hate the things that humans build upon it. It simply outlasts, with infinite patience, everything that does not truly belong there, while quietly preserving the very few precious things that genuinely do. Now, I really want to hear directly from you. Which of these 12 forgotten places would you actually be brave enough to visit in person? And which single one would you never set foot in, no matter how much you were paid to do it? And do you truly believe the desert reclaims whatever does not belong to it? Or is that simply a comforting story we tell ourselves to explain away our own human failures? Write your honest thoughts down in the comments below, because these forgotten histories genuinely deserve to be remembered and talked about. If this long journey into the buried heart of Australia meant something to you today, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story the Outback tried so hard to hide from us. Thank you sincerely for watching all the way to the end. Stay endlessly curious, and until next time, always watch very carefully where the sand has recently been moving.